What's up guys, my name is Ivan Baldovinos, and on this channel I provide tips, tricks, advice, and strategies for your graduate school applications. So if you are new here, consider subscribing. In this video, I am going to share with you my PhD interview experience plus some model questions and answers, that way you're ready and prepared for your graduate school interviews. You should expect to hear back about interviews in early February, and then the interview should be conducted in mid or late February. Let's start off by reading the invitation that I received via email, and then we're going to dissect that so we know exactly how to prepare for that specific interview. So this interview is for the University of California, San Diego in their Education Studies PhD program. So the subject line of the email stated, "On behalf of Dr. Contreras, PhD application review interview scheduling request." So this is telling me that I'm gonna have an interview with Dr. Contreras, who I actually wrote about in my statement of purpose as one of the people that I want to be on my committee for my dissertation, but also someone that I want to be mentored by. And so the email reads, "Dear Ivan, congratulations on being selected for the interview stage of the PhD application review process. Dr. Contreras looks forward to speaking with you about your research interests, experiences, and future career goals. This is also an opportunity for you to ask her any additional questions you may have about the program and research opportunities at UCSD. For the digital interview, you will be using the Zoom platform. I will send you a link to access a Zoom digital meeting room. All you will need is internet access. There are no login requirements. If for some reason the video interface is not working, there is an audio call and number that can be used as well." So let's go ahead and dissect this email because it's going to help me and you prepare for your interview. So in the first little paragraph here, we see that Dr. Contreras is going to talk to me about my research interests, experiences, and future goals. So that's telling me as an applicant that I need to be well versed in my research interests, my educational experiences, and my career goals. So I know that I'm gonna ask myself and I'm gonna prepare myself to be able to answer these three questions in depth and in detail. So the second part of that this paragraph states that they're expecting me to ask additional questions regarding the program and research opportunities. So I want you to make sure that you have well-written questions that you want to ask your interviewer. And the second paragraph is telling me that I'm going to be doing it through Zoom. So that's going to tell me that I need to prepare my Zoom account, that I need to have access to a webcam, a computer with internet access, obviously. And so that's kind of prepping me for like that outside factors that play in this interview. And so I want you to take note of that because that's important also for this interview process. Okay, so now that we dissected the interview request and now that we know what exactly they're gonna ask us, let's jump right into some model questions and answers. For this section of the video, I have written out some model answers, but I do want to tell you that I did not verbally sound like a robot and actually read this word for word. I did not memorize it. I just wrote it beforehand before I was conducting this interview, and use my own words in like more of a conversational tone when I was talking to Dr. Contreras. So one of the first questions you're going to receive is, "Tell me about yourself." So a couple of tips for this. So one tip that I do want to tell you is this is your elevator speech, your elevator pitch. So this should be no more than 3 minutes long. It should be concise, and you should be telling your interviewer or interviewer committee a couple of things. So briefly talk about who you are, your location, and self-identifiers. So what does this mean? So this means that you're gonna tell them your current location of where you're at in the United States. You're also gonna tell them some self-identifiers in terms of your self-identity. So are you first generation? Are you low income? Are you a child of immigrant? Are you an immigrant The second thing you want to highlight is your research and your research experience and your interest. This should be very brief because you should anticipate them asking you about this later on in the interview. The third thing you should be adding to your speech is professional experience. And this should be brief as well again, but also you should know your program well. So I know that this program in particular, they want people who have experience in education. And so that's why I'm going to tie this into my elevator speech. And then finally, the last thing you should add is why you are pursuing a PhD and what are your career goals. Again, they're going to ask you more in depth about this later on, so you should briefly state it, and this could be very broad at this point because you should anticipate them asking you later on. So here's the model answer that I provided, and again, I did not sound like a robot, I did not read verbatim, and I did not memorize this, but this is like generally what I said when I was speaking to Dr. Contreras. I am a first-generation college graduate from Soap Lake, Washington, which is a rural town in eastern Washington state. For the past 4 years, I have been working as a director of a federally funded college access program at a community college. These experiences have led me to focus my research on equity and access issues in higher education in the context of rural education, Latino males, and community colleges. Through this research, I want to transform rural education for underserved students, especially Latinx students. So as you can tell here in my elevator speech, I was somewhat detailed about my experiences and who I am. I only use two self-identifiers. So one of them is being a first-generation college student, and then also that I live in rural Washington state. And that's important because obviously, as you can tell, my research interests they're about rural education, and so I wanted to tie that into my elevator pitch. I also talked about like my work experience and as well as my career goal, which was like transforming rural education, which I'm going to get more into detail when she asks me that question. The next question that you should anticipate receiving is, what are your experiences in the educational field, or what are your experiences in your field? So some of the tips that I have for this question is that you want to talk about the experiences that you made an impact and that were impactful for you. So you want to stick to those experiences, those internships, those summer research internships, those leadership positions you held, or your work experiences. You want to make sure that those are impactful, not just for you, but also for your community. But you also want to make sure that you spent quite a bit of time with these experiences. I would suggest, 3 months plus. If you only did like a small little project for a week, I personally wouldn't put that or talk about that in my interview process, because they want to make sure that you made an impact, especially if your program is about education, transforming education. The longer you are in the field, the more experiences you have, the more ways you were able to impact people's lives. And so I would, analyze your resume and figure out which are the most prominent experiences you want to talk about and the most impactful experiences you want to talk about. You also want to make sure that you explain these experiences in detail. Remember, the committee members have only read your application materials, your statement of purpose, your resume, and so you want to provide that context. So this interview is going to allow you to speak from the heart, and it's going to allow you to speak about these experiences more in depth, more in detail. And then my third tip is to speak from the heart, make it emotional, provide that emotional aspect to this process and make it personable, because they only read your interview materials and those are just paper. So this is an opportunity for you to throw out your personality, that you care about these issues, and so evoke that emotion in this part of your interview. So here's the model answer. For the past 4 years, I have been working as a retention specialist and director of the TRIO Student Support Services program, where I worked on increasing retention, graduation, and transfer rates at Wenatchee Valley College. Within that role, I managed a large federal budget and allocated resources to support my students. One of my favorite parts of the job is connecting with students, especially underserved students, and changing their lives. So as you can tell here, I spoke briefly about one experience. I would suggest speaking about one or two because you don't have that much time and you don't want to prolong these answers because you don't want them to sound boring. You want them to be concise and get to the point and provide that impact right away. And so as you can tell, I was detailed with providing the program that I worked with, my roles, and how I changed the lives of students. And then I talked about a little bit more of the admin side because I'm also interested in administration after the PhD. And so I wanted her to know that. I do want to mention though that this is a conversation, so the professor, the committee member, they might ask you, probing questions or additional questions. So I remember in my interview process, she asked me other questions in more detail about what I talked about. And so even though I provided this brief little paragraph answer, she did ask me for more information about it. So I do want you to make sure that you know that whatever you provide, there's also room for them to ask you additional questions. It's not just like, back and forth, you answer this question, that's it. They're going to ask you more probing questions. They want to dig more deeper into your experiences. And so make sure that you are well prepared to answer these questions in depth. And when you're practicing, make sure that, you answer in as much detail as you can with each response. The next question you may encounter is, what are your career goals? So some of the tips that I have for this is you want to be concrete with your answer. At the beginning, in the first question, when they asked you about yourself, that was a good time to be broad. In my example, I said that I wanted to transform rural education for underserved students. But at this point, when they're asking you directly, what is your career goal? You have to be very concrete. You have to mention exactly what you want to do. So do you want to be a professor and educational researcher that's going to transform rural education? Do you want to work in administration at a community college or for your institution? Do you want to work at a nonprofit? Do you want to be a director of a program? Do you want to develop a program? Do you want to be a consultant? What do you want to do? So you want to be very detailed, even though they understand that this could change as you go into the PhD program, but you want to be concrete at this point. It's going to show that you have direction and that you have a goal that you want to attain. So it's going to show that drive as well. You also want to sound confident. One of the sayings that I always heard when I was applying is fake it till you make it. If you have that imposter syndrome or you're just unsure if you belong in a PhD program, sound confident. They want to accept people who are confident, who know what they're doing, or who at least show that they know what they're doing, because they want to accept people who are going to get through their program and who are going to have the strength to get through a rigorous program. So I want you to make sure that you are confident, and so evoke that confidence in that interview. So here's the model answer. I want to become a professor and educational researcher where I focus on access and equity issues in higher education. In my role as a professor, I want to be involved in decision making at the institutional level to create programs for undergraduate students. In order to get to that stage, I want to get involved in research projects as a PhD student and then pursue a postdoctorate. So as you can tell in my example, I was detailed. I want to be a professor, an educational researcher, and within that institution, I also want to provide research-driven decision-making at the institutional level. I also want to create programs for the college that I work with based on my research. Then I provided an example of how I want to get there. So I want to conduct research projects so I can gain that experience. And then after my PhD, I want to pursue a postdoctorate. So I want you to be specific when they ask you about your career goals. Do some research if you are unaware of what you want to do, or if you don't know the names of certain types of roles. Do some research beforehand as you prepare for these interviews. Another question you might encounter is, how will UC San Diego and the Education Studies program help you achieve your goals? So they're going to ask you about the program and they're going to ask you about the institution. So why do you want to apply for this program, this college, this university? What does this program have that no other program has that's going to help you reach your goals? And so some of the tips that I have for this is do the research beforehand. I would say read your statement of purpose again, because you should have answered this briefly or in detail in your statement of purpose. And then I also want you to do some research on their website and see if there's anything that you missed that you can add to the interview process. So here's the model answer that I responded with. I want to attend UC San Diego because I want to work with you. After reading your biography on the website and speaking to some of your advisees, I found that we have similar research interests. I am passionate about advancing the success of Latinx students in Washington State, and I read that you were given the keys to Seattle for your work with the Latinx population. I would like to learn from you and leverage some of those connections to continue the work you started in Washington State. I also like the cohort-based structure of the EDS program. So here I was detailed in the reasoning why I wanted to be at UC San Diego. So Dr. Contreras is well known in Washington State, and so I actually had some colleagues at my previous professional job that knew her. And then when I did some more digging in on their website, I read her biography. I also, went further and looked at other things, her CV and stuff like that. And I found out that she was actually very instrumental in changing some of the educational dynamics in the Seattle area. And so she has a lot of connections on the West Coast in Washington State, and so I wanted to leverage those. And so I talked to her about that in my interview, and she was very receptive to that. She was very, impressed that I went and dug deeper into the previous roles as a professional, because she has worked in Washington State in the past for like the past 10 years. And so she was impressed by that. And so in my interview, we talked about that more in detail. She provided me with some, names that I should be connecting with now, even though I wasn't in the program yet. And so now that I am in the program, she's helping me, make those connections and conduct that research that she was working on when she was working in my state. And so I used that to my advantage to be able to make that connection, but also because I'm really interested in transforming education for Washington State. And so I wanted to converse with her about that in my interview process. And then finally, I mentioned that I really liked the program because it was cohort based, and I like that style of programs. And so I talked to her more in detail about that during my interview, and she was able to provide me more insight about the program and the cohort base. And this program is new, it's only in its 5th year now, and I'm a 5th year cohort member, and so it's still brand new, and so they're still working out the kinks in terms of what they want the program to be in the next 5 years. And so we spoke about that during my interview. It was very conversational, and so I suggest that you do your work, you provide the details, you look on their website and see exactly why you're choosing this program and this institution. Because this is a PhD interview, they're gonna ask you about your research interests and experiences. So the question is, what are your research interests and experiences? And so some of the tips that I have for this is that I want you to speak about your research experiences, whether as an undergraduate, a master's student, or a professional. What projects have you conducted, and provide detail. Talk about your methodologies, talk about your hypotheses, your questions that surrounded that project, talk about the results, the outcomes, how you use the outcomes to inform a practice, a theory, whatever it is that you use those outcomes for. Talk about those as this part of the question. You also want to showcase your skills. Are you well versed in qualitative skills? Are you well versed in quantitative skills? Are you well versed in mixed methods? What are you well versed in? And even if you had minimal experience, let's say you are an undergraduate applying for a PhD right out of undergraduate and you think that your skills are not valuable, they are. They're going to showcase what direction you want to be, or what direction you want to take your research in when you're a PhD candidate. So if you're thinking about doing a qualitative research project, then you want to highlight your qualitative research experience, even if it's minimal. You also want to talk in depth about these projects, like I mentioned earlier. They want to know the details. They want to know what you're bringing to the table, what you're bringing to the cohort, and then how you're going to leverage those skills for your dissertation. And so you want to make sure you talk about these in detail. For this question, I did not provide a model answer just because I already spoke about my research interests. And so I really told Dr. Contreras that I wanted to impact rural education in Washington State, and that I was interested in looking more deeper into the experiences of Latino males in the rural education context at rural community colleges. And so that's briefly what I stated, and then she asked me more probing questions. She also shared with me the research that her students, her current advisees, are conducting and some of the projects that she is currently conducting and how I can jump onto those projects if I was accepted into the program. So again, this is a conversation and we were just kind of talking about different interests, because I have a lot of interests, but I generally talked about, like, the most prominent ones when she asked me this question. Alright guys, so that's the end of my PhD interview model questions and answers video. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe. I do plan to provide more videos on the interview process. So the next couple of videos are going to be about how to prepare, so what to do to prepare for these answers and questions. And then I'm also going to provide a video on how to prepare technology yourself, how to dress, things like that, how to act on Zoom. And so subscribe to my channel so you can be able to know, so you're able to see these videos. But and then I'm also going to provide an example of my master's experience for my interview, because that was a little bit different from this, this question and answer interview that I had for my PhD. So I want to provide that experience to you as well. That way you're able to prepare in case you do encounter this style of interview for your master's or PhD program. I will see you in the next video.